I'm actually an introvert, which is kind of, people are surprised when I tell them that. When I was in college, I didn't think, I want to become a teacher when I get out of here. So I am a retired Navy helicopter pilot. I did that for about 22 years and had a couple jobs flying manned aircraft after I retired. One of those was working with a helicopter pilot who had his Part 107 license, which is a license that's required to fly small unmanned aerial systems. And he asked me if I had my Part 107 license. I'm like, no. And so we talked about it a little bit more, and he encouraged me to get my license. And ultimately, what I found out, that he was searching for people that he knew through his manned aviation experience to become unmanned aviators so that we could operate the drone swarm light show down at Kings Island. The unmanned aerial systems out in the world, the goal is to conduct missions that are otherwise, we call it dirty, dull, and dangerous. That's what we call the 3Ds. So things that might otherwise be dangerous for a manned aircraft crew to do, or are dull, meaning they're kind of boring and repetitive. And why is that important? Because human nature is, if you're doing the same thing over and over again and it's not exciting, it's harder to stay focused on it. And it's true for pilots too. So if you're doing something where you're just going out and flying an airplane around for hours at a time, that can be hard to stay focused. So situations like that, if we can fly a UAS instead of a manned aircraft, we take the risk away from the human pilots. And generally speaking, it's also more cost effective to operate a smaller platform. So that's sort of the goal overall in a nutshell. We're trying to prepare our students to operate the aircraft. That's probably the piece that most of them think of when they imagine, I'm going to become a UAS student. They just think we're going to teach them how to fly drones. But the reality is that's a small piece of the overall puzzle nowadays. Most companies are looking for folks that can operate the UAS and do something else. And that could be maintaining them. So somebody who has the ability to fix things when they break, do the routine maintenance, replacing stuff that's worn out. Doing data analysis is a huge piece. In fact, that's a growing area of our industry because much of what we do is doing some kind of image capture. So just like we're using here what we call an electro-optical camera in our terminology, meaning it's sensitive to the parts of the electromagnetic spectrum that we can see with our eyes. And UASs certainly carry those, and we've all probably seen aerial footage that was shot with a UAS. But beyond that, we have all sorts of sensors that are sensitive to other parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, like ultraviolet, infrared. We have sensors that will be able to detect several hundred different types of electromagnetic energy and put it all out there. And the products that we get out of those are typically made by processing imagery through some kind of a fairly complex software package and creating something that is useful to the end customer. And that's not intuitive for most people. Utilizing those software packages typically takes training and a lot of practice. So that's another big piece of the puzzle for us, is to make sure our students at least have been exposed to those things. If all they're able to do is fly the aircraft, they're going to have a hard time being competitive in the current UAS job market. Obviously, the opportunity to fly UASs is huge, and we're going to set them up to be able to get an FAA certificate, a pilot certificate. You are not legally allowed to operate a UAS for commercial purposes, meaning somebody's going to pay you or give you some kind of compensation unless you have the Part 107 certification. It's not the only way to get that certification, but it's part of our program, is that you're going to be trained so that you can go out and pass the test. Obviously, when we first teach students to fly, they're learning and they can be a little bit hard on the equipment. So we wanted to build something that was durable and repairable on site. So hence the name, the tank. So we can either 3D print or cut out or order online almost any parts we need to rebuild this one. We have another group of students that will be operating an Autel drone here. This has a very highly accurate GPS module on top. It looks like a little top hat. Most of them are capable of 4K resolution at up to 60 frames per second, and then usually a 36 to 48 megapixel still camera. So in addition to our small unmanned aerial systems, which all fall less than 55 pounds, we have some much larger ones, but this particular one uses a turbine engine. So it's a jet engine, just like a very small version of what you'd see on a typical airliner that you might fly across country in. By being able to expose them to lots of different vehicles, it certainly sets them up, probably to be a leg up on the competition for people that just go get their Part 107 certification but don't have the training and education. It's both exciting and a little bit nervous making for some people. It's something we kind of mentioned previously, and that is that it used to be perceived that just having the remote pilot certificate, so the FAA license to fly this, was going to be enough. In the manned aviation industry, most of the time you get your pilot certificate, and once you have enough hours to get hired somewhere, you go become an airline pilot, and that's what you are. You're an airline pilot, and that's all you have to do for the rest of your career if that's what you want to do. But I think for students that are just starting now, it's awesome. This is a great opportunity to get training on a lot of different aspects of the industry, not just operating the drones. Most of the challenges stem from the fact that it's such a young industry. I mean, aviation's only been around now for 110 years in the manned form, but even that, there's nothing that's happened in the last 40 years that is brand new for manned aviation. I mean, we've had advances in technology, but the concepts are similar. Whereas UAS is we're doing things now that we wouldn't have ever thought of 5 or 10 years ago. The Federal Aviation Administration that has to regulate how these things are going to be used safely has a really hard time passing laws and rules for us to operate under and keeping up with the changing technology. So that's one of the biggest things. And one example is what we call beyond visual line of sight. So today, almost all UAS operators must keep the drone or the aircraft inside, in sight. They've got to be able to see it to fly it, which limits us to, a mile or so. And it obviously depends on the size of the air vehicle. Bigger ones, might be able to get further than a mile, but generally it's 1 kilometer to 1 mile. And that is a limitation right now. If you imagine airliners and most other kind of manned aircraft, that's not the case. They can go dozens of miles, hundreds of miles, and they're certainly not in anybody's line of sight other than the pilot sitting in the cockpit. The technology is improving so that the sensors and systems on board the air vehicles that allow them to detect other aircraft, manned aircraft, or other UASs are improving rapidly. It's like every year there's some new technology or a new application of existing technology. So, we're working to keep up with it. We're trying to make sure our students are prepared. They understand sort of the direction that the industry is going, things to watch out for, so that they're hopefully not surprised when they get out there and start looking for their jobs. The successful ones have realized sooner than other folks did that they were going to have to do something else. It's like, I can fly your UAS and I can maintain it for you. Or, as I said, data analysis. Those are the big three right now, that if a person is willing to take the time and go the extra mile to learn one of those niches very, very well, it's going to make them that much more successful in trying to find a job and also staying relevant as the industry changes.